This is the November 30th broadcast of CBS Evening News 2020. And this is a follow-up to the 60 Minutes piece featuring Christopher Krebs, where he talks about how the election was perfect. You know, it's funny. He sounds like Trump when Trump said he had a perfect phone call. So the media attacked Trump for having a perfect phone call to Ukraine, but now Christopher Krebs is allowed to say he had a perfect election and everybody like totally supports him. And the weirdest part of all that is that the whole issue of the software, that's a part of it. And that part was what was first reported, and it's almost like it created its own little storm. And that issue was spotlighted by the media. And I don't really necessarily agree that that happened. My concern are the mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting. And the media refuses to talk about ballot harvesting and if it was possible and how it would have been done and then what they did to prevent it from happening. They won't talk about that stuff because this guy's job was to ensure that when somebody hit a button on a machine, it printed out a ballot that matched what was being hit on the screen, and that ballot was then counted. And he's saying that was perfect. That's fine. That's not the whole issue. They're spotlighting that as being the whole issue when it's not. Ballot harvesting was nurtured over the summer with all the protests. There really was a little bit of an end game here that started with the protests, because the George Floyd incident, that's its own thing. The George Floyd incident, to my opinion, was murder one, because 8 minutes and 46 seconds of crushing agony with people begging for this guy, with begging for the police to take their knee off his back, several police at the same time, and the police mocked everybody and even threatened them with being charged with a crime if they tried to stop. So to me, that was like a lynching, okay? That's what it was. But what did the media do? They spent the whole summer linking any other issue that came up where police had to make split decision actions with George Floyd, and it was bunk, okay? And people were even afraid to say it was bunk because of all the protesting that was going on. We had, we had protests over police with people bursting out of doors with knives in their hand, ready to like running at the police with a knife. And that produced huge protests in Pennsylvania, of all places. So the summer was spent fueling so much anger among young people. And again, you've got COVID also, so they're already panicked because they don't know if they're going to school, they can't get a summer job, they're freaking out. So now the news pumps out all these bogus police brutality stories. They're bogus in the sense that they were linking them to George Floyd. They never once had the gall or the guts to say, you know what, George Floyd, we all pretty much agree, was bad because this went on for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. All these other incidences were split-second decisions. We cannot put these together, but they did. So when you create that much anger and animosity among young people, of course they're going to want to do whatever, and you politicize it as Democrats good, Republicans bad, as if the Republicans wanted George Floyd with his knee on his neck for 8 minutes, and the Democrats didn't, which is the most ridiculous premise. And they used that premise to build a coalition among younger people over the summer who, frankly, might do anything to make sure Trump didn't win. That's what they did. And ballot harvesting, there were several weeks to harvest ballots that were mailed out, meaning you collect ballots that aren't going to be used. You collect ballots from locations where the person might have moved. You even offer people $5 or $10 for their ballot. If there was money to fund all the protests, there was money to fund ballot harvesting, okay? That's why they're not talking about it, because if they don't talk about it, then they can't be accused of lying about it. That's what's going on. So unless they want to have the guts to actually do a whole show explaining how they stopped ballot harvesting, we can assume ballot harvesting went on. And that's what Trump has been fighting and trying to get the most. And the problem is, once they separated ballots from the envelope, that, I think, made ballot harvesting successful. Because the envelope, there's like an envelope and another envelope with a signature, and then the ballot's inside. And you can then theoretically compare it to previous signatures, but then that gets into issues of electronic signatures versus pen signatures. They're not that easy to match up because you get the delay in the electronic pen, and also usually it's a thicker line. And frankly, they don't even necessarily give you the right writing position. Usually you're leaned over a table or something to sign, which isn't how most people sign things. They're usually seated when they sign something with a pen. So you have all these variables that could have made it possible that out of at least 66 million mail-in ballots, and it may have been as high as 75 to 80 million that went out, they're not all accounted for, okay? So it's possible with the amount of time, the time there was to return the ballots, that they could have harvested ballots, especially in highly concentrated cities. And then when you factor in that those were the same cities that had the protest, yes, there could have been ballot harvesting. And they're not talking about it. That's the cover-up. And they focus on who knows who planted the software stories? Maybe that was even the Democrats who planted it. Because when I heard those stories, I was kind of like, well, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't. But ballot harvesting most likely did happen. And that's where they're not focusing their attention on. There are reports of people wanting to vote on Election Day, and they had mailed in their ballot, but it hadn't come back yet, allegedly, as they hadn't been notified that the ballot was counted. So they wanted to vote. So they have to be given a provisional ballot. But that provisional ballot has to be set aside for 2 weeks or 3 until they verify whether the original mail-in ballot, what happened to it. Well, in Philly, they were converting, this is testimony, they were converting people who were showing up. Those provisional ballots were being converted to regular ballots. And when that conversion happens, the ballot, it's over. There's no way to trace. So that person could literally have had a mail-in ballot count and then had a provisional ballot converted to an actual ballot, and then that's it. And there were claims of 50 to 75,000 ballots, empty ballots, in Philly at one of the voting centers. There were a lot of testimonials at the Giuliani hearing, and the media chose to focus on Giuliani flailing his arms as if he was a lunatic or something. So those are the issues. The media is playing an active role in not wanting any investigation done, and it just seems complicit, calling everything the president says false or baseless, pumping up the protests over the summer, blaming the police all the way through, and then suddenly after election, the police are the good guy. There's no more reports about the police, which is there shouldn't have been to begin with. They're not clumping everything together anymore. So there looks like there was an agenda, and the result would have been ballot harvesting the ballots, and they won't talk about it. And I'm going to play this now.
Christopher Krebs, the former top cybersecurity official Mr. Trump fired earlier this month, told 60 Minutes the president's voter fraud claims have no merit.
The proof is in the ballots. The recounts are consistent with the initial count, and to me, that's
stupid. See, even the people who were concerned about the fraud said that recounting the ballots is going to give you the same number. So this is nothing revelatory here. This isn't anything. This is nothing. We all know that. If you take a bunch of ballots that you fit into the machine and feed them again, you're going to get virtually the same result. That is known. He keeps fixating on that. And then the media follows him on that point and will not discuss what happened before the ballot got fed into the machine. That is where the smoking gun is.
That's further evidence, that's confirmation that the systems used in the 2020 election performed as expected.
Right. The systems, meaning the machines. The actual machines worked, right? You took the ballot, you fed it in, it counted it. You could do it 10 times, it'll get you virtually the same result. That's what he's fixated on. That's why he didn't have the right to say it was a secure election. It might have been a functional election, right, where the machines functioned correctly, but he has no jurisdiction over the behavior of people, okay? He does not talk about the behavior of people who might have ballot harvested. He won't go there because he doesn't know. But when he spoke about the election being secure, that's why Trump fired him. He overreached in what his position was, and the media won't expose that.
As expected, and the American people should have 100% confidence in their vote.
That recount in Wisconsin cost the Trump campaign nearly $3 million, but it resulted in an additional 74 votes for President-elect Joe Biden. President Trump says he'll file another lawsuit in Wisconsin by tomorrow.
See, what's another lawsuit mean? What does that even mean? See, they're making him look like a fool by focusing on, oh, he thinks if he keeps counting the ballots, he'll get a different result. That's not what this is about. None of this has been about that. Just there was that little bit of hyperbole early on from people out there that were coming up with these crazy theories that are probably totally not true about the software, okay? But ballot harvesting is the issue. I've said it over and over, and they won't say it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have to do a Google search on the evening news to see how many times they mentioned ballot harvesting since the election was over, since the November 3rd election. Because I don't think they did. I've not heard them use the word ballot harvesting. They use every other combination, but not that. And even now, they're mocking, this is a mocking comment at the end, where they're saying, well, he spent all this money, now he's going to spend even more money. What is wrong with this guy? Go listen to, I'll put a link to the Giuliani, I'll cue it up. I'll put a link, and I'll cue it up to the spot where you can start to hear testimonials from people. They sound like totally normal people, and they just tell you what they saw on election, when the votes were started to be being counted. About the empty ballots, just sitting there, about converting provisional ballots into regular ballots so you can't even trace them anymore. About how the chain of evidence, how boxes of ballots and things would they were just never in a line of sight. You weren't allowed to look at them. They were kept at a distance. So somebody walks in from the back with a box of ballots. How do you not know those aren't freshly made ballots right in the other room, because nobody can see into the other room where they might have just been filling them out. They bring them in and they run them through. Once they run them through, they now become legitimate every time. That could be the scam. And whether it is or not, the fact that it's not being discussed has become the scam.